As a 47-year-old man, I once believed I'd remain childless for life. Now, I'm on the brink of fatherhood for the first time, expecting a child with Pam, a 37-year-old woman with whom I had a casual relationship. The pregnancy was unexpected, and initially, I didn't feel particularly enthusiastic about the prospect of becoming a father, especially with 50 looming ahead. At my age, the notion of raising a child can be intimidating, but I've consistently approached my responsibilities with seriousness and commitment for nearly 30 years. I'm learning to adjust to this new reality because that's just what you do. You step up and face your responsibilities, and I've never been one to run away from a challenge. Let me clarify something. I've never been the kind of guy who dislikes kids. In fact, I've always enjoyed being around them. For many years, I was known as the fun uncle who showed up to my nieces' and nephews' birthday parties and other special events, always bearing great gifts. I'd give them the coolest toys or the latest gadgets, whatever would make them happy, and I made sure to be there to cheer them on during their sports games, recitals, or any activity that meant a lot to them. Beyond that, I set up trust funds for my siblings, kids to help them out as they grew older. Since I never had children of my own before now, I saw my nieces and nephews as my only heirs. To me, it was important that they were taken care of. I'm fortunate enough to have been successful in my career. I got to where I am as CEO because I worked hard, had some smarts, and found myself in the right place at the right time. My siblings and their spouses were supportive of my role in everything I was doing because I was doing well financially. I wanted to ensure my nieces and nephews had every advantage in life. I provided them with cars when they were old enough to drive, sent them on fancy trips when they graduated high school, and even set up college funds for their education. I also wrote my will to specify that my nearly $1 million life insurance policy would be divided equally among my siblings' kids, along with the money made from selling my main home and summer house. Plus, my savings, stocks, and shares would be divided up among them, along with a few other smaller properties. I've always been upfront about this because I didn't want any confusion after my passing. I shared my plans with my siblings and their spouses to ensure everything was understood clearly. I wanted everyone to be on the same page, and they all seemed fine with it. My siblings respected my decisions and were glad that their kids were being taken care of. Now that I'm expecting my first child, it's a big shift in thinking. I've realized that I'll need to adjust my will and make space for my own kid in these plans. It's a lot to wrap my head around, but I'm ready to embrace the responsibility and see what the future holds. While things might change, I'll always cherish the role I've had in my nieces' and nephews' lives and make sure that my child grows up knowing the importance of family too. With the arrival of my daughter fast approaching, I met with my lawyer to draw up a new will. I wanted to make sure my daughter would be well taken care of, so I decided to shift the majority of my assets to her. I thought it was only fair to give my family a heads up, just like I had with my original will. My lawyer suggested that everyone sign a statement acknowledging their agreement with the new arrangement, and I thought that was a solid plan. I gathered everyone together to explain the changes. I expected understanding and support, but that wasn't what happened. A few members of my family were visibly disappointed or outright angry about me giving most of my assets to my daughter. They felt misled, arguing that I'd given them the impression they'd inherit more, only to end up with less. Some even went so far as to question my daughter's paternity. But the way they did it felt like it wasn't out of genuine concern for me. It was more about controlling the money and unfairly judging Pam based on stereotypes. This behavior really turned me off. I believe this new arrangement is my way of ensuring my daughter receives the best support possible, especially since she'll have to face the reality of having an older dad who's going to be in his 60s and 70s while she's still growing up. Given the reactions I've seen, I'm now thinking about giving my daughter 90% of my assets instead of the original 60%. But before I make that decision, I wanted to get some input from non-biased people. As right now, I'm still a little emotional about this, and my goddaughter suggested I come here. Am I the a-hole? Edit. Since someone brought up some concerns, I want to clarify a couple of things. First, a DNA test was already done, and Pam's unborn baby is 99.99% mine. My family doesn't know I did the test because I didn't think it was something I needed to share with them. Second, Pam is African American, and that's why my family made those offensive accusations about her. I've known Pam for a long time. She's not just some random person I met recently. I've always found her to be trustworthy and reliable. I believe she'll be an incredible mother to our daughter, and that's why I'm so determined to make sure our child has the best support possible. If anyone has any thoughts on this, I'd love to hear them. Do you think my plan to increase my daughter's inheritance to 90% is reasonable, or should I stick to the original 60%? Now for the top comments. They're more interested in your money than you. I say you give them nothing. Not the a-hole. Not the a-hole. No one has owed an inheritance, period. Not only is it totally understandable that the majority of your assets would go to your own child, but your nieces and nephews have enjoyed many years of your generosity already. You've done your due diligence in informing them so they can plan accordingly. If they have an issue with that, it is theirs to deal with. You've done nothing wrong. You could give 100% to your daughter, and you still wouldn't be the a-hole. No one is entitled to anything, family or not. Story 2. My wife and I are both 28, living in the Denver area. She works for an airline and has this fantastic job perk where she can give flight benefits to her parents and one friend. She listed her sister as the friend, so her parents and sister get discounted flights while my wife and I can fly for free, unless we're trying to snag first-class seats. So how does all this work? Well, her parents and sister get discounted flights but don't fly for free like we do. Even so, over the 3 years my wife has worked for the airline, they've still managed to rack up a huge bill. We're talking about $7,000 worth of flights. My wife gets a detailed invoice each month showing all the flights they've taken and how much they owe. If she can't pay the full bill by the due date, the airline just takes the amount out of her paycheck directly, which means she essentially works for her family's travel expenses. It's like a fly now, pay later setup. But here's the kicker. Airline employees don't make a ton of money, and my wife only works weekends, so her pay isn't exactly huge to begin with. She hasn't gotten a proper paycheck in over 2 years because everything she earns goes straight to paying off her family's flight bills. Here's another thing to understand. We all fly standby. That means we don't get a guaranteed seat. Instead, we wait around until they call us up, and if there's space available, they'll give us a boarding pass with our assigned seat number. Once we have that, our boarding passes look just like everyone else's, even if those people paid full price for their tickets. But if the flight is full, we might not get on at all and would have to wait for another one. Standby is a bit like a gamble, but when it works out, it's a fantastic way to travel cheaply. Now, I earn enough money to cover all our bills and still have a little left over for fun. But my wife hasn't seen a proper paycheck in ages because her earnings just vanish into paying for her family's travel expenses. Her parents and sister take full advantage of those discounted flights, and her dad, in particular, really racks up the bill. He's a traveling welder who often needs to fly back home for his job. Although he gets some money from work to cover flights, the extra he spends adds up quickly. The thing is, my wife loves her family and feels obligated to let them enjoy the perks she's able to offer through her job. But it's become a real strain on our finances and a source of stress for her because she never sees a paycheck. I've tried to support her by covering as much of our daily expenses as possible, but it's starting to feel like we're both working just to keep her family flying. It's a tricky situation because she doesn't want to tell her parents or sister to stop traveling, but she also needs to see a paycheck again. It would make a huge difference if they could be a bit more mindful of their travel habits and at least cover a larger portion of the bills they're racking up. But so far, we haven't figured out how to approach that conversation without making it seem like she's taking the perks away from them entirely. I don't want to see her family benefit at her expense forever, and I can tell she's starting to get worried about how long this can go on. But it's hard to find a balance between keeping the peace with her family and ensuring our own financial health. For now, we're trying to take it 1 month at a time and hoping things will improve soon. My wife's dad works in remote areas where there are smaller airports. His company usually gives him a check for $1,000 or more to cover his travel costs, but he doesn't tell them he's flying at a discount, so he pockets the extra cash and keeps it for himself. This was all happening before the pandemic hit. Meanwhile, my wife's mom and sister would spend months flying around the world, taking advantage of the airline benefits my wife provided. They didn't see the issue with it and kept racking up flight bills that my wife ended up paying off. Last month, my wife decided enough was enough and asked her family to start paying back at least a little bit for their flights. That's when things got ugly. Her mom played the "I gave birth to you" card. Her sister said she deserved the perks for all the time she drove my wife to school, and her dad brought up the money he spent raising her. I couldn't take it anymore and snapped, calling them all roaches and saying they didn't deserve the flight benefits. I even threatened to contact my father-in-law's company and expose how he was pocketing thousands of dollars. We had a huge shouting match that ended with my wife crying out of pure frustration. But I was so fed up that I actually called my father-in-law's company and explained how he was taking their money. That phone call ended up costing him his job. When I spoke to the company, they mentioned they were already suspicious because he couldn't provide accurate boarding passes or receipts. They said he'd been turning in old receipts that my sister-in-law would alter to make look new. He made a big mistake recently by submitting a boarding pass marked standby, which was a clear giveaway that he wasn't buying a full-price ticket. The company had let it slide in the past because other employees had submitted similar passes before, but after I explained the entire situation to them, they realized he had been pocketing their money and decided to fire him. This situation left my wife torn between her loyalty to her family and the need to put her foot down about the flight benefits. She knew it was the right thing to ask them to start paying back, but their intense backlash left her feeling upset and conflicted. It's been hard on us both, and now we're just trying to move forward after this tough ordeal. Am I the a-hole? Edit. To clear up some questions, first and foremost, even I couldn't make sense of all the numbers at first, but my wife showed me her payroll on her company's website. It clearly displayed the amount she was charged for flights versus what she earned, leaving no doubt that her paycheck was wiped out by her family's travel bills. After everything went down, she decided to remove her parents and sister from her flight benefits. It wasn't easy for her because she had grown so used to their aggressive reactions that she saw them as normal. But I will never apologize for standing up for her and for myself. Her sister, the only family member who has apologized so far, shared that my father-in-law would have been caught sooner or later regardless of my actions. It turns out he wasn't just faking travel receipts. He had also broken some OSHA regulations and was caught on camera doing so. He even faced harassment complaints. I didn't press for the full details, but it was clear his company was already suspicious of his fake receipts before I called them. Even though he lost his job, he quickly found work at another welding company. This time he's staying local instead of traveling. What matters most to me is that my wife finally got an apology from her sister. That apology meant the world to my wife, and seeing her relieved and validated made it worth standing up to her family, no matter how messy things got. Now for the top comments. Not the a-hole. They are leeches. You gave them a chance to do the right thing, and they refused. You should also have your wife remove them from the benefit. That is so rude for your father-in-law to just pocket the money, not give it to you to pay for the flight. Get rid of the freeloader. You don't need that in your life. Not the a-hole. And I would start looking into legal options. Frankly, what they did is fraud and theft. Your father-in-law's own actions cost him his job, not you. Not the a-hole. They should have been paying your wife back for their flights the whole time. She isn't there to fund their travel plans. Actions have consequences, and now they've learned that the hard way. They've essentially been stealing your wife's entire pay for many, many months. It should have stopped long ago. Story 3. My wife and I have had a tough time lately, all because of her dad. Let me tell you about this guy. He's loaded and has always helped out his kids financially, giving them more than most parents would. He owns a bunch of houses and lets his kids live in them for almost nothing, or even for free. On the surface, he looks like a generous father who just wants to see his kids thrive. But here's the kicker. He's super controlling and has a short fuse, especially when it comes to his wife and his properties. We live in one of his houses, grateful for the help, of course, but it comes with strings attached. For a while, things were fine, but a few weeks ago, things got out of hand. My father-in-law's wife, my mother-in-law, started throwing accusations around that my wife and her brother's girlfriend were picking on her. She didn't have any real proof but made a big stink about it to my father-in-law, who instantly believed her and flew into a rage. Without checking if the accusations were even true, he trashed both of their houses, including the one we live in. It was a total mess. It was awful. We walked through the wreckage, finding broken furniture and appliances everywhere. Our stove was completely busted, making it impossible to cook anything. Since he owns the place, we didn't have much power to do anything about it. My wife was really hurt, Not just because of the damage, but because her own dad would believe those lies about her. I was angry too, but mostly I was frustrated because since it's his house, we couldn't do much about it. My mom found out about the whole mess and decided to come over to try and help us out. She showed up with her new boyfriend, Anthony. She brought us some new furniture to replace what was broken and a bunch of food because our stove was out of commission. She wanted to make sure we were okay, and we appreciated her effort. But as we stood there talking, she noticed something else. Our cars were also vandalized. It seemed like they had been keyed and had dents in a few places. She asked us about them, and I explained that the father-in-law owned those too. So we were just as stuck there as with the house. That's when Anthony piped up. He leaned in with a smirk and said, "Wow, do you guys own anything?" in this super rude tone. I felt my blood boiling and told him straight up that if he made another snarky comment like that, he'd have to leave. He apologized right away, but it didn't feel genuine. He just wanted to avoid more trouble. My mom wasn't much help either. She tried to jump in and said, "Well, you can't make them leave. Because it's your father-in-law's house." I just stared at her in disbelief, wondering whose side she was on. How could she take his side, knowing everything he had done? But then she did something that blew my mind. She picked up her phone and called my father-in-law. She asked him if she could stay at our house, even though she knew full well that he had caused all this damage in the first place. He told her she could, and she acted like it was no big deal. That's when I lost it. I told her to leave and not to come back if she was going to side with him over us. I said she shouldn't expect to see her future grandkids if she's going to be an aggressor against their mom. My wife deserves better than that. My mom told me to calm down, but I yelled at her to go. I was furious, and she knew it. Later, she called me, trying to say I overreacted. She said that I needed to chill out and that things could be fixed if I just stayed calm. But I told her that she embarrassed my wife and weaponized my father-in-law against us. If she wanted any relationship with us going forward, she'd better apologize to my wife and beg for forgiveness. In the background, I could hear Anthony telling her to hang up on me. He clearly wasn't interested in patching things up or helping us come to any sort of understanding. Instead, he just wanted to get off the call and let it blow over. She eventually hung up, and I was left fuming. But then the story got worse. I started hearing from my mom's friends, her side of the family, and even some of my own relatives. They said I was overreacting and that I needed to chill out. Some even called me a jerk for how I handled things. They didn't see how hurt my wife was or how much damage my father-in-law had done to our house and cars. They were just taking my mom's word for it and telling me that I had made things worse. Honestly, it's been tough to handle. On one hand, I want to keep peace with my family and not be the one who causes drama. On the other hand, I'm not going to let anyone side with my father-in-law after he destroyed our home and believed false accusations about my wife. It feels like nobody understands just how much damage he's done or how much my wife has suffered because of all this. I'm trying to stand up for her and make sure she feels supported, but it's hard when so many people are telling me I'm wrong. So here we are, caught in the middle of family drama. My father-in-law still owns the house and the cars, so we're stuck with that. My mom refuses to apologize and has Anthony on her side, whispering in her ear. And I'm just trying to keep things together while protecting my wife from any more harm. I know people think I overreacted, but I'm just doing what I believe is right. I can only hope that over time, my family will understand that and see why I had to stand up for my wife, even if it made me look like a jerk in their eyes. Now, for the top comments. You did overreact, and yes, you're the a-hole. They were making goofy jokes, basically calling you and your wife moochers. I mean, their statements are true, that the father-in-law pays for everything. Maybe that's why you're so salty. Everyone sucks here. Every single one of you. You all need to find a place that does not belong to her father. Same with cars. That is a toxic relationship and unsafe. Your mom's boyfriend had a bit of a point though. Rude. Same with your mom. You have no control while you live there, it seems. Guessing no legal rental agreement. I don't see what she did as picking on you, but childish. And yeah, you overreacted to all of your need to grow up and become self-sufficient and get away from her father. Jeez. Everyone sucks here. Yes, your mom was rude, however, she and her boyfriend do have a point. You and your wife are dangerously dependent on her father, and the two of you need to figure out how to support yourselves in an independent and safe way. I also would be shocked to know that a married couple was entirely dependent on one of their parents for housing, cars, etc. Your mother made an important point, clearly, in that phone call to your father-in-law. It sounds as if you and your wife needed that wake-up call. Pay attention to the substance of that message, even if it was delivered in a not-too-subtle way. Story 4. My partner decided to let his friend Brett crash at our place until he could find a spot of his own. Right now, renting in Australia is a huge challenge, especially in Queensland. The rental market is tight, and finding an affordable place is tricky. Since Brett is a friend, I was cool with him staying over initially, thinking it would just be a couple of weeks. But here we are, and he's been here since September. And honestly, I've had enough. Brett doesn't contribute much around the house. He mostly lazes around, spending his days doing next to nothing. I do the bulk of the cooking and cleaning, which I was fine with when it was just my partner and me because that's our routine. But now that Brett's here, and his two boys who come over every other weekend, it's way too much. It's been non-stop chores and housework, and I'm beginning to feel like a maid in my own home. Our grocery and utility bills have noticeably increased. Brett only started giving us some money after my partner had a word with him. For weeks, he freeloaded without shame, hanging out on weekends and after work, sitting around smoking, drinking our booze, and expecting me to cook dinner. And then he goes on and on about his ex-girlfriends and why he's fed up with women in general. It's exhausting to listen to, and it makes me uncomfortable in my own home. My partner talked to Brett about pitching in and pulling his weight around the house, but I've seen very little change. I'm not a perfectionist or a neat freak by any means, but I like the house to be reasonably tidy. Living with Brett has turned into a nightmare. He leaves his stuff everywhere, and he rarely bothers to clean up after himself. It's made our home feel chaotic and messy, and I'm sick of it. To make matters worse, my partner isn't taking the situation seriously enough. He doesn't want to kick Brett out because he's worried Brett will end up living in his car. I understand where he's coming from, but it's frustrating because Brett is clearly taking advantage of his kindness. My partner brushes off Brett's behavior, like when he leaves dirty dishes lying around or dumps his laundry all over the place. He acts like it's no big deal, and that leaves me feeling unsupported. This whole situation has really strained our relationship. Brett's presence has brought tension into our household. It feels like my partner and I are constantly on edge. Every time I bring up my frustrations about the living situation, it's like I'm talking to a brick wall. My partner just doesn't seem to get how much this is affecting us. We used to have a peaceful, happy home, and now it feels like chaos all the time. I'm stuck between wanting to help Brett out and needing my space back. I know that being homeless is rough, but this arrangement isn't working for me anymore. Brett's lack of consideration is unacceptable, and I feel like my partner is letting him get away with it. I can't put up with this nonsense any longer, and it's starting to affect my relationship. I need my partner to understand how serious this is, but I'm not sure he fully realizes the impact this has on me and our relationship. Ultimately, I feel like Brett's overstayed his welcome. It's not that I don't care about him finding a place to live, but we need to prioritize our home and our relationship first. The tension has gotten unbearable, and something needs to change soon, or this situation is only going to get worse. Now, for the top comments. Not the a-hole. I see why no woman wants to be with Brett. Take off somewhere for a while, after leaving a lot of mess. Make sure there's no food, toilet paper, or clean towels first. Not the hole, but you need a game plan here, and you need to take action. You need to sit down with your partner and express honestly and fully how you won't accept having to take care of so many extra people in the house. I notice you haven't mentioned what your boyfriend does around the house, so position to him that he helped with the housework and pick up the slack. Brett is not. Tell him honestly how much extra work it is to maintain the house with Brett, and sometimes 2 kids here, and that you need help. If your boyfriend refuses to take on any of the chores to lessen your load or tries to say, well, Brett is supposed to do that, then agree and say that the two of you at the same time need to sit down and have an adult discussion with Brett about his behavior and what you expect from him moving forward. You both have to be a united front. Story 5. My husband, who's 39, works with 2 friends, Frank and Marlene. Frank is 42, and Marlene is 4. Here's where things get complicated. Frank and Marlene used to be more than just friends. They hooked up, and Marlene ended up getting pregnant. Now, Frank is trying to avoid paying child support, claiming that Marlene told him she couldn't have kids and he didn't want any. So, he's dragging her to court to prove his point. My husband has tried to stay neutral and not pick sides. He just wants to avoid the drama, so he doesn't talk about the situation with either of them. But at home, this whole situation weighs on him. For the past 3 years, we've been trying for a baby but have had no luck due to some fertility issues. Meanwhile, Frank gets Marlene pregnant without even trying, and then decides he wants nothing to do with the kid. How could he walk away so easily? It makes me furious. One day, my husband and I are at a baseball game, just enjoying the day. We're having a good time, but then we notice Frank is also there. My husband mentions that Frank wants to hang out afterward. Honestly, I'm not too thrilled because I don't really want to spend time with someone who tries to dodge his responsibilities like Frank. But my husband insists, and we all end up hanging out together after the game. We're all buzzing a little after a few drinks, and I can't keep my feelings to myself anymore. I call Frank out, telling him he needs to be a responsible adult and own up to his actions. He can't just walk away and leave Marlene and the baby hanging like that. Frank tries to defend himself, saying he's already been paying child support, but I'm not buying it. I walk away to cool down, but then realize I need to find my husband. When I return, Frank is still trying to explain himself, but the truth hurts, and he doesn't really want to hear any of it. One of Frank's friends, or possibly his new girlfriend, intervenes to defend him. The situation starts to become tense, prompting my husband and me to decide it's wiser to depart before it escalates further. We're keen to avoid causing a scene or being ejected. As we walk away, I find myself shaking my head at Frank's handling of the entire situation. It seems unjust, particularly considering our struggles to conceive, while he treats this new life as a responsibility he wants no part of. My husband attempts to console me, yet I sense this is difficult for him as well. We exit the ballpark and make our way home, still trying to process what occurred and contemplating how to address Frank going forward. Am I wrong for bringing it up?